Boy, oh boy, that Jewish God, that God of the Old Testament, sure is a God of wrath. No? Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up some Torah together. One of the great joys, honors, and pleasures that I have as a rabbi is to be invited to come to churches in order to be able to give a Jewish view of things. Here in Germany, that oftentimes takes place during what's called Israel Sonntag, a celebration of the Hebrew underpinnings, the Jewish underpinnings that does predate Christianity. But also I've had several amazing friends and colleagues that have invited me into their congregation over time. And one of the things that I tend to always talk about on a first visit, unless there's another specific theme, is this idea that the God of the Old Testament, and I have to put scare quotes around everything there for a lot of reasons, is a God of wrath. Now this week, the reason that this is coming to mind is we are in Parashat haazinu, second to last parasha in the Torah before we turn it all around and go back to Bereshit, back to the very beginning of the book of Genesis. And this is a poem, and it's a poem that has an awful lot of wrath in it. So if you're going to actually look at the concept of wrath in the Torah, this is one that you just can't ignore. But it's also an opportunity. This is something that I've heard so often. I've had so many people, I don't want to say attack, but misunderstand, and through that misunderstanding say things that are just distinctly unpleasant, is this idea of God being a God of wrath. It's a big enough deal that very early in my book, I wrote a passage on a true life incident that I happened. And because it quotes haazinu, I'm going to go ahead and use this and just read a little passage because this takes us exactly where we want to go. Once, while delivering a lecture at a Unitarian Universalist church about the problematic anti-Semitic undertones of Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, I had a community leader approach me at the end of the weekend and offer what I believe he felt was a compliment. "You seem to have such an evolved sense of religion and spirituality. How can you then belong to a religion that offers such a backward and wrathful view of God?" This memory is indelibly etched into my brain. I wish that I was exaggerating on the words, but, well, anyway, how I felt continues in the narrative. Standing there in my yarmulke, not even having started rabbinical school, yet somehow attempting to represent both my religion and good academics, I was flummoxed. I did not at the time have the tools to even begin to answer what represents a crux of understanding, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." All right, not going to go into too much on that one. Chapter 1 is trying to take us back and show us that when we say the word witch, we view something from medieval time, and medieval times thousands of years after the term makshefa, from which we translate the word witch, comes. Anyway, so this is part of this discussion. You'll have to read the book to get the rest. Anyway, back into the narrative. But I wish I could have said, the Hebrew Bible is filled with narrative, poetry, mythology, and a basis for a specific civil society. It is about a relationship between a people and their evolving religion, and within it are descriptions of every emotion that can emerge in a relationship, from the most intense anger to the most tender love. Yes, there are passages in the Torah such as, from haazinu, "The Eternal saw and was vexed, and spurned his sons and his daughters. He said, I will hide my countenance from them and see how they fare in the end. For they are a treacherous breed, children with no loyalty in them. They incensed me with no gods, vexed me with their futilities. I'll incense them as a no folk, vex them with a nation of fools. For a fire has flared in my wrath and burned to the bottom of Sheol, has consumed the earth and its increase, eaten down the base of the hills. I will sweep misfortunes on them, use up my arrows on them." It sounds bad, I know. But for each one of these moments of apparent wrath, there is the Eternal passed before Moses and proclaimed, the Eternal, a God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin." So the first question that needs to be answered is, with both ideas existing within Jewish tradition, why is your focus on the wrath? The second question that must be addressed is, have I ever asked a Jew if they see themselves as being subject to a God of wrath, or is that simply my understanding that I have projected onto an entire religion. Perhaps we can add a more provocative third. If I am not a Jew, is my assumption regarding something in Judaism more authoritative than that of a knowledgeable someone in the Jewish community? I really wanted to read that because I do wish I could have given that answer before. Haazinu is filled with brutal language. It's the scary stuff. It's the hard stuff. It's the stuff that gets stuck in our brain and we forget about the mercy. We forget about the love. We forget about the other parts. But I think haazinu is actually the key to understanding that. Here is what haazinu looks like, right? When you're reading from a Torah scroll, this is what you're looking at. The columns are divided. The greater column is wider than any other part of Torah. According to Jewish halakha, it has to be written that way, otherwise it is invalid. Other parts of the Torah that have clear visual aspects to them, like the Song of the Sea, they almost look like the sea pulling back, parting. What's this about? And the key is, it's about relationship. Look, here's left side, here's right side, here's the gap that's between us. Two different people, two different beings facing off against each other, trying to figure out what dialogue and relationship means. And this, believe it or not, is going to be one of the shortest sermons that I've ever given, because I think that there is a simple truth to get from these horrifically difficult words being in haazinu, and then what haazinu looks like, how it actually appears on the page in front of us. Something that is pretty unique with Judaism is the unflinching look at humanity as humanity is. The Torah is filled with heroes, the Abrahams and Sarahs, the Josephs, the Huldas, the Devorahs. But with the exception of probably Devorah, every one of these heroes, just look at David and what he does with Uriah and Bathsheba. Just look at Abraham and saying that Sarah, tell everyone you're my sister. Just look at Sarah and the jealousy when she has a child of her own. Part of what makes the Torah not only powerful, but something that we can read over and over again, our iterative process of Torah. Every year we read it because it's going to reflect a new truth. Why? Well, it has the ability to reflect truth because it shows humanity as humanity is. We'd love to believe that our heroes were perfect, but that's not who humans are. We're not looking at super beings. We're just looking at beings who happen to make decisions that put them in a narrative, but what allows them to stay in the narrative is that we see not just the best parts of ourselves, but the worst parts reflected in it. Well, here's haazinu, and it's about relationship. It's about the hard parts of relationship when we're disappointed. See, the secret of understanding so much of this language in Torah is our relationship collectively in the narrative with the eternal began on Sinai. Literally, a relationship began with a mountaintop experience. Think about what we know about mountaintop experiences, right? They can be a little bit dangerous. Why? Because, well, once you've experienced that, you're high in a pretty literal sense, but certainly in an essential sense. But that's not the rest of life. Our relationship in our narrative began at a high point, us collectively being able to experience Kol Hashem, the voice of the eternal. And when that's the start of a relationship, and it doesn't happen on day 2 or 3 or 1,000 or 3,000 or 20,000, you look in the mirror and say, what did I do wrong? Why was day 1 the best day of the relationship? And if you take a friendship or a marriage or any sort of partnership where the best day is day 1, and then after that you can never recapture that, the relationship is never going to survive. But yet we entered this relationship in the narrative on a high point and obligate ourselves to the relationship. We're not going to back out. This is who we are. We are Jews. We are the people of this covenant. But when we never have a second mountaintop experience, what's going to happen? We're going to question ourselves. We're going to question our narrative. And what happens when we start questioning relationships? The language we use can be extreme. And so as we have a text dealing with wrath in a visualization that looks like a dialogue, we're simply seeing how we, in our narrative tradition, are trying to deal with the fact that we don't live up to our ideals. This is something I say to conversion candidates all the time. I have a speech prepared. It's called the Khutzpah and reality speech. 1, you have to have chutzpah, Not everyone's going to just invite you because they know they should. You actually have to say, I want to take part in that. And that's hard because, listen, I'm an introvert. I don't always want to go up. But in Judaism, there is a level of chutzpah that needs to be there. You know what? I'm going to be here. I'm going to take part. You're going to have to deal with me even though I look different. I act differently. I have a different background. The other side is the reality. And the reality is at some point, whether you're a born Jew or a Jew by choice, Jews, us, we are going to disappoint you. I, as a rabbi, I will disappoint you. I'm not only as human as the rest, the flaws are there. There's no way that I can live up to my best moments. I will eventually disappoint. And in doing so, what happens to so many people who experience for the first time walking in through the idealism of Judaism, the idealism that comes from this idea that we started with a mountaintop experience and then we can't live up to it. How many people have stepped away? I know that in my years of being a congregational rabbi, I can think of literally dozens of people across 4 different congregations who left a synagogue because they came in and a human being said something really stupid to them. Well, guess what? That's what we as human beings do. And when we believe that anything should be ideal, a religion, well, what's going to happen is as humans, we'll never live up to it. And the Torah is a story of people who cannot live up to an ideal. No one can. No people, no religion. And if we have any people or group or religion that pretend that they are above reproach, run away from them as fast as you possibly can because it's going to get really scary. What I find so powerful about Torah and haazinu and this expression of relationship is that it's dealing with relationships as they are, filled with beautiful stuff and really, really awful stuff. And when we stay together, it's because we found a way to work through that over time. Just as what happens in Torah. As we finish with haazinu, next week we enter v'zot habracha. And here's the blessing. It is moving from the wrath to what is actually all over in Torah. Blessing, lifting up, pulling together. Why do we do that? Because we have our bad moments, but we also have moments where we can pull it together. Boy, I've seen a few of those recently. People lifting me up, people lifting each other up. It's amazing to see Jewish texts and our understanding of that which is greater than us, the eternal, is only filled with wrath if that's all we focus on. And because we like our super beings to be a reflection of our own ego, it makes us incredibly uncomfortable when we see language like this. But the reason we continue to explore these texts is so that we step on our egos a little bit and allow ourselves to see that we as human beings are both filled with love and rage at the same time, that we go through moments of forgiveness and mercy, as well as moments of anger and disappointment. And with our texts forcing us to look at the amazing complexity of that reality, we have in front of us something that allows us to look in the mirror and decide to be a little bit better, a little bit more elevated, a little bit more able to deal with complexity as it comes to us, so that ultimately we move beyond our own personal wrath into something much more uplifting. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time.